record button. We did have a number of faculty, including the science area, who were very interested in today's presentation, but of course, they were teaching, so they asked me to record the session, so I will make the link available later. Also, Ron is going to do some slides. We're thankful that he can share those slides, and I will send those out afterwards along with a link to the video. So we are talking about, we're kind of starting a series here on hearing from the experts, from the faculty who are doing the teaching. And the first area is in the sciences. And the format for this, for the meetups, has been pretty informal, sharing and kind of sharing of information as well as questions. So I'm going to be quiet now, and I've used up all my words, and I will open it up to Margaret or Ron or whoever would like to get started.
Take it away, Ron.
All right, Gary, did you say that there was a video that you wanted to show today too?
I did a little later. I have the video in case the person who was going to share it is unable to, so.
Perfect. Okay, great. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. I'm going to do my best to kind of put in a nutshell what sorts of science simulation tools there are out there. I mean, it's a pretty broad category, obviously, and discipline specific to some extent. So I'm a chemist, so bear with me. Some of the examples I'm going to show you are chemistry specific, but there are similar options for other disciplines. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And like Gary said, the slides are available. He'll send those out. And if you have any, comments, questions, whatever, unmute yourself and interrupt me, or punch them into the chat. I have that pulled up as well, so we'll try to go that way. So the hard part for me in sort of putting this together was this title, right? Science simulation tools. That's pretty broad. So again, what I thought was maybe useful was to start with this idea of a few questions. What options are there for online labs? And I should say at this point, I'm assuming that we're talking about lab experiences, although I will mention some of the digital tools that are available that we use in our lecture courses as well. There are obviously lots of little things that you can use in lecture, but I'm going to focus in on kind of the lab experience. Another question, when do I need an online lab option? So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then what do I hope the student will accomplish by completing this? And it seems to me that in all of the examples I've looked at, looking at different materials online and talking to different vendors over the course, especially last spring when we all kind of fell into this online teaching thing all of a sudden. I think that third question was the one that we struggled with the most. And most of the sales reps I talked to, most of the, sort of marketing folks I talked to were talking about the features of their products. Obviously, it integrates in your gradebook and it's really easy for you to use. And, it's got a splashy title. But I think that third question is probably the one we have to think about first. And that's why are we doing this? And I think there's lots of reasons for that, but the students really should be doing the same things that they're doing in person, right? That's ideal. So if we really break down what a good science lab looks like, if the students were in person and they were doing this traditionally, they should be thinking about safety. They should be thinking about proper techniques. They should be thinking about reagent use and disposal, although I will mention later, that's one of the fantastic things that we found in the chemistry lab is that all of a sudden, if we're doing online labs, we can show them labs with reagents that are far more dangerous than we could use, or far more expensive, or frankly, that we just don't trust a first-year student to handle. So we can show them those things. We should be having the students becoming familiar with lab techniques and with the equipment. This is obviously a challenge if they can't touch anything, right? So, you know, I've talked to different people who have explored the idea of doing, you know, labs at home, and those are options that are out there in some disciplines that I'm not going to talk about today. We kind of made the decision that for us that we weren't comfortable with the safety aspect of things like that, that we didn't want the students getting, you know, kits of things to use in their kitchen, although those options exist. So that's out there if that's something you wanted to talk about. They need to be performing accurate observations. They need to be performing, you know, measurements that are using the right tools and getting the right data. They need to record that data, and that's something that gets lost in, I think, in-person labs sometimes, proper recording of data. We've got to be really attentive to that, but also in the online format. We should be talking about doing the data analysis and calculations. Of course, if students are doing things from home, you know, we have academic integrity concerns, things like Chegg, and I recently discovered a subreddit that students can post to and just ask for help. But really, most of them are asking for someone to do the work for them. So that's out there, right? But that's out there anyway. And then ideally, the students are reaching conclusions that ultimately help them understand the topic. So, you know, I've had people sort of in other discussions ask me things like, well, can these goals really be accomplished online? Can we really do this online? And I kind of turn the question around and say, well, can you do it in person, right? It's the same sort of a consideration. We just have technological differences. I would argue that except for, you know, physical handling of equipment and chemicals in our case, except for that physical tactile part, all of this stuff can be done equally well online as it can be in person if we put the attention into doing it. Then the second question is, well, why should I consider even having an online lab option, right? We've always done labs in person, so students should just expect that. And to some extent, that's true. And I'm going to skip the low-hanging fruit up here that, you know, we have a pandemic, so we had to deal with it. But going forward, I think there are lots of really good reasons to have online lab options or remote learning lab options. And some of these didn't even occur to me before, you know, the pandemic happened and we started doing all of this. We were at Mott perfectly content to have all of our lab courses in person. We sort of had this internal discussion in chemistry for a long time that maybe for some of our low enrolled classes, maybe where we were trying to get some guest students to come in and pad our numbers a little bit, maybe we would offer a hybrid class where we could get them to only have to come to campus once or twice a week, whatever it might be, and otherwise put some of the lecture material online. And that's something we're still considering going forward. So we still have the hands-on tactile lab, but it's easier to register and easier to schedule and easier to attract outside people. But one of the sort of biggest things for me came about when I was sort of looking at some of these options that are designed to be lab parallels. And I'll mention that again in a little bit. But the idea that if a particular student misses a lab, whether it's for illness or for emergency, or if campus is closed on my lab day. A couple of years ago, you probably all remember that winter when we missed, you know, practically every Monday or whatever it was in the semester. If you had a lab on Mondays, you were in pretty bad shape. So, you know, this kind of an option of having a fallback had not really occurred to me too much. That maybe we'd like to have an in-person lab experience, but we have this option to fall back on if we need to. The other thing, of course, is to facilitate online completion of programs, right? A lot of programs require a science class with a lab. Maybe those students don't necessarily need a super rigorous lab experience, but they do need a lab experience. And so that can be maybe an option, particularly at maybe the lower levels. And then one that my wife actually threw at me. My wife is not a science person. She's a science-minded person, but not a science-trained person. And she kind of relayed to me this idea that when she took her first science lab, it was an extremely anxious endeavor for her. She'd never been in a science lab. She wasn't sure what to do or how to handle herself. And for me, and probably for most of you, that's a totally foreign concept that, science labs are very native for a lot of us. So the idea of letting students go through kind of a preview, see a demonstration, see how a technique is done, actually see somebody do it before they go into the lab and do it in person, has a lot of value that I had not previously considered myself. Or on the flip side, to review it. So using this as a pre or post lab kind of a setup where students have the option to go back and see it again. Or if their data doesn't make sense, they did the lab in person and now they're crunching the numbers and they're like, I don't know why this didn't work right. Maybe you can go back and look at something that someone else has done. So there are lots of reasons to do this. I think that if we put the proper amount of care into choosing the experience, I think we can accomplish most of the goals, at least, that we'd like to accomplish. And so it brings us to the idea of what options are there. And this is kind of where I have some examples that may or may not fit your particular disciplines, but I've kind of tried to bin these options into categories. So again, please chime in the chat if I'm missing something or there's something you're using that you really love that we should talk about. I'm just going on my experience. So when we were trying to move all of our courses online last spring and then keep them online in a ever improving format over the summer and fall, and now into winter, we looked at a lot of tools, including what I'm calling here these VR lab simulations. And this is what I think of when I think of science simulation tools. These are things that the student's gonna log into some program and they're going to physically experience the lab in kind of an augmented or virtual reality setup. So I've got a couple of pictures here. The bottom right one is from Labster, which is a big one, at least in our discipline. And the upper left one here is from Praxi Labs, which has a somewhat more limited offerings, but the same idea. In both of these cases, the students would perform whatever procedure they're performing in a virtual reality environment. They're step by step, and most of the time they involve going to multiple stations. So it's designed to kind of mimic what a student would do in the lab. Down to the point of, they're going to walk in and they're going to, the little doors are going to open and they'll walk up to their bench and then they have to get out their little notebook and put a glove on their little digital hands and, go through all those step by step by step. The Labster one in the bottom left is a little bit bigger picture here. And you can kind of see they've got a data screen off to the side. They've got a representation of some piece of equipment that the student's using. This is a physics lab, but the idea is the same. And then down here in the bottom left corner, they've got some sort of a digital lab notebook. So it's a little bit of an inception thing. They have a digital notebook and a digital representation of a digital lab, but they're recording their data. And so if the student was interacting with this, they would click on the little screen to get information. They'd click on the instrument and do whatever manipulations are required. And then they would click on their little e-notebook down here and record their data. And so it'd be step by step by step. Maybe they have to leave this station and they have to go over to the side bench to get some other reagent or to look at a chart on the wall or whatever. Some of these have very immersive surroundings. So I've kind of color-coded here in green what I think are the pros of this sort of a setup, in that we have the step-by-step kind of real procedural feel to it. Again, in many cases, multiple stations. These experiments are all created by an editorial group, right? There's a review process that goes into this, albeit at a company. It's not really peer review, but they're all reviewed by somebody for quality, for consistency. And they typically have some sort of gradebook features that are accessible, and maybe they can be integrated to the LMS or maybe not, but there's some grading thing that happens. And some of that takes the workload off of us to manually grade all of the lab. One of the big downsides that we saw was cost. Obviously, that's going to vary based on what you're subscribing to, but they can be pricey. And in addition to maybe textbooks, maybe other technology concerns, maybe you don't want to have the students buy something else. The other thing, and what I think is the biggest negative for these types of things in our experience, was technology, and kind of an equity point here that running virtual reality takes a lot of computing power even now. And so, my relatively new, fancy laptop that I use was a little bit clunky on some of the Labster demos that I did. So I can only imagine a student who's trying to do this on an older laptop, on a Chromebook, on a cell phone or tablet. It may not work. And so ultimately, I think even more than cost, I think it was the technology aspect of it that pushed us away from it as an option. But your mileage may vary here. There are lots of options here, and again, a lot of the publishers are starting to include this kind of content in their mastering or OWL or whatever sorts of publisher programs you're using. They're starting to include this kind of stuff as an option. A second category that I think is very useful are these what I've called digital interactive tools. So these things that typically are standalone. I listed here the PhET series. This is from University of Colorado, that they have a whole bunch of simulations out there that you can use. There's another collection of these in chemistry, at least, called Chem Collective. Many of you are familiar with the Merlot searchable database of stuff, and these are included in that stuff. And there's other ones. And again, there's a couple pictures here. So these ones tend to have a particular purpose, right? They tend to be standalone individual things, which is fine, but it takes a little bit more curation for us to build them. Many of them are OER available, so that addresses the cost option. And most of them function with pretty rudimentary technology. Most of them are designed to operate right in a standard web browser, and so it's okay. But you can see the difference here. The one on the left is from Chem Collective. And this was a case where the student was going to be identifying some acid compound. They have a little gray box over here on the right, that's their workbench, and they have a collection of options on the left that allow them to pick up some pieces and manipulate them. And so the idea would be, I need a beaker. So I'd click over here and drag a little beaker over to this side. It's symbolic, much more than like a virtual representation. The one on the bottom right is one of the PhET simulations I use in my lecture courses even. It's a molecular modeling tool. And this particular one, again, it only does molecular shape modeling, but it does it very, very well. And I think this is a case where it's actually much better than what we do in the lab. So, when we're in the lab, we typically have a kind of dry lab workshop thing where students build models and play with them, and they can touch them and turn them around in their hands. This is a great option for that at home as well. So these tools have lots of uses. There's a note in the chat that a lot of the OER stuff has Flash-based items that can't be used now, right? A lot of these technologies are changing, and so Java and Flash, Flash is officially discontinued now. So a lot of the tools that are out there just won't work anymore with a modern browser. A lot of times, there was one I was looking at yesterday that I found a new one when I was researching some options to put in the talk here to add to my references slide. And I couldn't run it because it was a Java thing and my computer had security issues it didn't like about it. So there are going to be some of those things that you can't necessarily use. Biggest cons, I think, to these tools are the variability, right? There's a whole lot of features. They're extremely variable because they're made by different people. The designs are all going to be different. The quality is going to be variable. Some of them are quite good. Some of them are not worth the time it takes to look at them. So it just depends. And there's a lot more work then on the faculty member to go through and specifically curate a list that you want to use. They also are typically, I say here, not gradebook integrated, but most of them are not even gradable. And so it depends on how you want to do that as far as coupling this maybe with something that is gradable. And that's what I've been doing. So I'll mention that at the end. The other family of things that I think deserve a discussion here, although they're not simulations, I think they're lab alternative things, are what I'm calling video demonstration labs. And so I've put an asterisk next to YouTube because you all know the perils and benefits of YouTube. But in the field, there's a series of products called JOVE, the Journal of Visualized Experimentation, that we've been using pretty heavily at Mott in chemistry, and a tool called LabFlow that I wanted to mention. These are two of the big players in this kind of video demonstration field. And again, the pictures here, the larger picture here is from JOVE. The bottom set of pictures is from LabFlow. These are systems or collections of short videos that demonstrate things. And so in the case of JOVE, which I can show you the website if anybody's interested. In the case of JOVE, it's actually a journal. The backstory to this thing is the founder of this journal was trying to replicate some experiments in postdoc or grad school or whatever, and they couldn't get it right. And they traveled to some far-flung corner of the globe to work with the original authors and the original technique, and they learned why they were doing it wrong, but they had to see it. And so they started this journal of visualized experiments where you upload videos instead of text or alongside of text. What they've done is they've curated a lot of that into an education module. And so there are some decent demonstrations of techniques, and they might be different than I would have done them in my lab with my equipment, but many of them are equivalent enough that they show the technique, and they're showing a real person doing it with some pretty high quality narration and things going alongside. LabFlow does a similar deal down here. So LabFlow is more of a system. They've got, this is one experiment that we're using in our intro class. So they have a PDF. All of their PDFs are open source, so they're all available. So it's a PDF that you could use in the lab for a student to come in with this printed piece of paper and do the work. But if they're doing it online, when it comes time for the data and report submission, they have sample data built into the program. So at least for the quantitative part, the students can get, fake data that you didn't have to make up yourself. And all of the numerical stuff is automatically graded. So it's kind of nice. There are additional materials, like in both of these cases, they've got little videos that are supplementary. Both of them have some limited quizzing functions. LabFlow a little bit more than JOVE, but they have some extra stuff. And again, it allows demonstration of unavailable techniques, things that for safety reasons or cost or complexity of the experiment that we might not be able to do in person. Maybe we could do some version of that technique in the lab, but then I could have the students go and watch more involved kind of a setup. Again, they may or may not be gradebook integrated, so there might be some work there. JOVE is just a delivery sort of a system. They offer quiz questions that go along with their videos, but in my experience, they're not very good, and there are only a few quiz questions for each one. So picture, 5 to 10 pretty elementary multiple choice questions. It's okay if you're just trying to see if the student watched it, right? It's enough to tell if they watched it. But if you're really trying to get to content and understanding, I have paired these with quizzes that I've written or worksheets that I've put together that they have to do something. Along with any other video content, right? You can't guarantee that they've watched it except by quizzing or requiring some sort of a deliverable. And there's maybe a cost. So the LabFlow setup is relatively expensive by itself. We were able to negotiate some pricing. So, again, there's some variability there in pricing. JOVE was an interesting one for us because we were able to get our library to subscribe to it. And so we have institutional access through the library, which means chemistry uses it, biology is using it, anybody could use it, and then the students have it as a reference source through the library as well. So there's lots of options there. That was kind of a nice thing for us that we didn't have to pass along a cost for that stuff to our students. And at least with JOVE, the materials integrate quite well into the LMS. We use Canvas at Mott, but it integrates quite well. And so the students are able to jump right in. And so what are we doing at MCC? The bottom line of all of this for us is that I would very much like to have my majors classes in person, right? We'd prefer that. We'd like them to be able to come in and touch things. But in those cases where they can't, like right now, We're using that LabFlow program for our general chemistry because everything we wanted was in it and we were able to get decent pricing. So we use an open source textbook for the course. So the students don't have any cost there. Doing the online lab, they don't have to buy a lab coat and goggles and all of that kind of stuff. So they, you know, I think it's costing them about $30 to buy access to LabFlow, which is roughly the cost of a lab jacket at the bookstore. So we kind of considered it a trade-off. For the intro classes, the GOB classes where the students for the most part really don't care about the chemistry techniques, they just need that lab experience. We're not as worried about them not getting the physical aspect of it. So we've been using more of the Jove, the video stuff. We've got some original content that we've built. And then because there's not very good assessment here, I'm doing the assessment through Canvas. So either they have a worksheet to fill out and turn in that's got some written stuff on it, or they're doing quizzing through Canvas just to show me that they did it. And then at all levels, you know, those simulations like the molecular modeling, that's really hard for students to visualize. And so having that digital model that they can play with is really helpful. So I use that even in my lecture courses. So I think it comes down to really how much effort do you want to put into it? And so, you know, we have to consider the desired use, right? Is this a full semester thing that I want to just deploy and not have to think too much about? Or is this something that I might just fall onto if I have a snow day, or if a student emails me and says that they're sick, I can just send them a link and say, okay, view this content and it'll be good enough. It's a replacement for this week. I think the equity concern is something to really consider in the back of your mind as you're picking new technologies, that, you know, students have to be able to access them easily and get the same experience that you're getting. And then long-term, at least our plan here at Mott, long-term is to try to generate some of this content in-house if it's not already available open source. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. There's plenty of good videos and things out there, but to some extent, it's nice to show off your own space and your own way of thinking and your own equipment. And, you know, to stop paying those subscription fees if it's not necessary. So as I mentioned, right now we're using LabFlow, but it's a little bit pricey. And so down the road, that might be a case where we discontinue that in favor of something homegrown, but it got us through in a pinch. So, so that's pretty much what I've got kind of by way of overview. You know, the last slide here has links to all of those things that I talked about, my email address, and I hope we can sort of discuss that and get your thoughts and see where you're at with everything I said and other technologies that you're using.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron, for sharing. Are there any questions? We have one more presentation, but any questions for Ron before we move on? I did just post a link to all the resources from today that are on our website. Anybody?
All right, Gary, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can do what you need to do.
All right. Well, next up is Stacy. She mentioned to me she was having some technical issues on her end, but will you be able to show the video, Stacy?
We'll give it a try, Gary.
Awesome.
Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Ron, for sharing all of those resources. I was frantically taking notes, and I know that the resource will be available to share with the science folks. So I'm Stacy Whitten. I'm the Chief Academic Officer for Schoolcraft College, and currently the Dean of Distance Learning. Maybe not for too much longer, but wearing that hat as well. So today I'd asked, I'd had some really good reports from our physics department about sort of a resource that they were using. And I asked the gentleman to come and talk today, but he had class. So that trumped this conversation today, but he did create a video that I could share. And in actually watching the use of the tool, it is not specific to science. It is not specific to education, but he's used it in his physics classroom. He's got really good responses from his students. And then you know, they enjoyed it so much that he's actually had them use the technology for projects that that they create for his class as well. So without further ado, I'm going to have Jesse Mason, one of our part-time faculty in physics here. Let's see if I can do this. A little talk. Let's see. 1 second.
Stacy, did you check the share computer audio with the Zoom screen share?
I just was thinking that, Lynn, and I was like, I bet you I didn't click that button. Erg. Thank you. Let's try this again. Sorry about that. All right. Type in if you can't hear it again this time.
Hello everyone, I'm Jesse Mason, and on behalf of Schoolcraft College, I am here to show you how to use SaganWorks software in your classroom. The purpose of this video is to teach you navigation, application, and construction. First, I'll show you how to navigate. I'm going to show you a Sagan I built for my astronomy class I'm teaching right now. So entering the Sagan, we can see that this is three-dimensional virtual environment software. We can double click on the floor to enter the Sagan. The W, A, S, and D keys navigate just like most computer games. To look around, you right click. You can see I've decorated this room with quite a number of astronomy pictures, but I also have PDF files. These are PDFs of labs we've done in class. You can also link to websites. This is a link to our Zoom meeting we have twice a week in class. I also use the web link function to put videos in my Sagan. So this is a just for funsy video shelf. I put on here one of the recordings I made of my class during their planetary project presentations. I think this may be the most powerful application of SaganWorks, is using it for students to give presentations. Here's a student pitching a vacation as a travel agency for the solar system. My students built educational exhibits rather than giving PowerPoint presentations. And I think more than being just a novel way to deliver information, this is a marketable skill that my students can put on resumes and on their LinkedIn profiles. So let me show you how to build. To get out of here, we'll double click the ceiling and we'll click the map icon. And you'll see that I've built quite a number of Sagans. We're going to build a new one. It's pretty easy. You just select a template from the palette here, and you click and drag. Oops. Click and drag. There we go. And then you double click to access the Sagan. Now I like to build from the inside, so we'll double click on the floor to enter. I said double click on the floor to enter. There we go. I haven't seen this one yet. This is a really handsome Sagan. I like this. Okay, there are two ways you can populate this using the knowledge item palette and the furniture object palette. We'll start with furniture objects. Let's put a couch in first. So you just click and drag from the palette, and we'll put a table. How about this end table here? Come on. Just click and drag. There we go. And you can turn it if you like. And then let's put a shelf, because I'm going to show you how to populate a shelf full of knowledge items. So there's our shelf. Now we go over to the knowledge item palette, which is this icon here. and you can click and drag any of a number of items that you have onto, say, the shelf. Now, to get items here, there are two ways you can do it. You can click that button, which allows you access to your storage, and then you can upload in a pretty typical fashion. Here, I'll upload a bunch of pictures I selected just for this Sagan. And then we'll X out of this. And oops, I forgot, you have to reload. That's the reload button. And then you'll see the knowledge items you just uploaded. There you go. And we'll pick one of Carl Sagan, for whom Sagan Works is named. There you go. Now you can do the same thing with web pages. You can, oops, they're under the knowledge item palette. And we'll select web pages. And you simply click and drag saved web pages to wherever you'd like. I'm going to stick this one on the table to show you not all of the knowledge items have to go on the shelf. There you go. Not much to it. Simple, straightforward, and it's completely free browser-based software. I hope you give it a shot. It's at www.saganworks.com. All right, take care and clear skies.
All right, so I know somebody's going to ask the first question about accessibility, and the answer is no, it's not accessible. So you'd have to be very, obviously, very aware of your population and their need for screen reader or not with that. But I was thinking particular applications would be, the health sciences and setting up case studies potentially, or, research libraries. I'm guessing you could set up a virtual lab. It seems like there's a lot of materials in there. But the same as what Ron said, when we get into these science simulations or any simulation, you're really looking at an equity issue with how many students are coming in on their phones and, the versus big computers. I do know that one of our instructional designers started doing a Sagan Works on his home machine. And he said, I've never heard the fan work so much before. So I know it does take a lot of computing power, but I also figured that we've probably got some techies in the audience today that might be something of interest. So just wanted to share that.
Great. Thanks, Stacy. I posted some of those resources that you mentioned on the website. Terry also posted in the chat Gather Town app for technical writing classes. Does anybody else have anything they would like to share or any really complex questions for Stacy? Because I know she has the answer.
I have I hope an easy question for Stacy. So in the video, your faculty member said that it was a free browser-based thing, and I thought it was pretty cool. I was looking at their website, and it says that you pay per visit to your virtual space. Do you have any idea how they're doing the cost aspect of that?
So I can tell you, Jesse doesn't pay for anything for his students because I'd be the one paying for it. so I would suggest maybe contacting the company, or if you want me to connect you with Jesse, I can certainly do that.
I was just curious. I mean, it's like a penny per visit. So I was more thinking logistics. Like the students could certainly pay for that, but at a penny per visit, it's hard to imagine how you do it. I was just curious.
Yeah. I'm not sure of the price process, but I know that we aren't paying for it at this time, so there could be maybe an educational opportunity there.
Reminds me of Second Life years ago. All right. Well, that shows how old I am. Anything anybody else wants to share?
If I can just reiterate something that Ron said in his presentation, a year ago when we were all scrambling to go online, we had some faculty come into their labs, and we had our media people, a couple of them, go to the labs with their cameras and record the faculty doing these experiments. So we use a couple of cameras and we record that, and then we would post those in Canvas. And then some of the faculty would then provide data sets for the students to do the calculations and then write up their reports. And that was a quick response to what we were all scrambling to do. But the unintended consequences, what Ron mentioned, is those videos are now being used over and over again to kind of preview labs when we went back to campus. Students really, we found all on their own, watched them and came to the lab much more prepared. And our faculty started saying, you know, labs are running much more smoothly than they ever used to. We're done faster. We're able to have conversations about results before, when we were scrambling to clean up and get everything put back. And it's that anecdotal evidence that we found that this is something that's really quite powerful. So I just wanted to reiterate that has been a real nice, a nice feature that we're now trying to incorporate on a much more regular basis.
And kind of to piggyback on that, Lynn, and with one of the comments that Ron made, for those folks who might be science phobic in a little, in a way, it gives them kind of a nice entry point that's sort of lower stakes. And it also, allows them to watch a video. I didn't catch that. I'm not familiar with the language. I'm not familiar with the tools. I think it can decrease some of that phobia, just like we've seen with math, and some of that anxiety around that as well.
And I was just going to comment too, Lynn, that so at Mott we have access for right now, at least, to the TechSmith Nomia video processing thing. And who knows what's happening with that as they discontinue it. But I've been trying to put my videos out on YouTube just so that, assuming that I've made it, right, that it's my content, so that it's open. It's not directly in Canvas. It's not behind that wall. So that's something that I hope to do at Mott. We didn't record very much. We meant to, and then it didn't happen as much as we wanted to. But the hope long-term for us is to generate, experiment PDFs that we're going to use in person, videos to accompany those, and then put that all out there, open source for our students and for whomever else wants to take a look.
Yeah, at Mott, our microbiologist last spring break, when he heard we were closing, he spent the entire spring break with his cell phone in the lab videotaping himself, and now he's got the entire semester done for lab.
I have sort of an administrative question, though, related to labs and putting them online and the payment piece of it. So if I'm a faculty member teaching a 4-hour lecture, 3-hour lab, and I don't know if everybody does it or if you have it broken out, and the student is charged for those 7 contact hours, but you're doing it all remotely. Has there been any conversation about remarks from students about, why am I paying for a lab class when I'm not in a lab?
We have still done that.
But it's not the physical building that you're in. You're doing the lab material, and that's why you're being, taking those 7 contact hours.
I think there's an important point there, though, too. We have to make sure we're still doing the learning objective, content that we would have been doing. Because even if we had a 3-person lab in person, we might be done with the lab in 2 hours or 2.5 hours, or it might take 4 hours, so the time, I think, is less important. And that's what these new Department of Education rules are trying to stress, right, is the content over the seat time. So I think that's been our kind of argument. So we're still doing all the same stuff. It's just not physical.
We certainly have a write-up and have been saying the same thing. I was just curious if students from other institutions have been raising that concern.
I had that 15 years ago or so brought to me, because I teach a field biology class and we give lab credit for it. And I had to justify why we give lab credit for a class you're outside. You're not in a lab. So.
Yes, you are.
It's a really
outdoor
lab.
Yes. There was a question in the chat from Kathy. I'm an adjunct faculty member. Can these materials that are developed be shared or made available to adjuncts?
Kathy, I don't know if you're asking me necessarily, but I think that's our long-term goal. Yeah, it's just to have this body of information that you know, is available to people, and then you know, individual instructors, at least for us within chemistry, some folks, you know, want very tight control of their own things, and some are perfectly happy reappropriating content. So yeah, but certainly available to whoever's teaching for us.
Great. Well, we are at the end of our time. I will post all of these resources out, and I'll send an announcement out on the listserv for everyone. Just thank you to everyone who presented or who put videos together for presentation today. And it looks like we may have a meetup coming up soon next month on Canvas APIs. So look for more information on that coming up. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
See you soon.